More than 20 years ago, a couple of college students made news when they found a skull on the bank of the Columbia River near Kennewick, Washington, while viewing a hydroplane race. They called the police, who later involved James Chatter, who had been doing archaeology in the area for 3 decades. Chatters expressed that he had seen plenty of skulls like the ones found, long with narrow cheekbones and an upper jaw, which he expressed to be a typical middle-aged Caucasoid male. Chatters thought he should return to the site where the bones were found, and sure enough, more bones were found on the riverbank, and Chatters collected them all. He began a study to look into the bones by laying them out on a lab table. He took several measurements, then formed the conclusion that the skull was that of a Caucasoid male who was between the age of 40 and 55 when he died. He estimated his height to be about 5 feet 9 inches. Chatters had some doubts when he conducted a CAT scan, and it showed a stone with a leaf shape was imprinted in the man's hip, like the ones used by the hunters of the Columbia Plateau between 4,500 and 9,000 years ago. Due to those doubts, he sent a sample of the bones to Irv Taylor, who had a radiocarbon laboratory. When the results came back, it was revealed that the sample was between 9,200 and 9,500 years old, thus sparking the controversy over who deserves the Kennewick Man. The Native Americans believe the bones to be the remains of their ancestors, while anthropologists believe the bones had many Caucasoid traits. Further study was necessary to find out the real truth behind the mysterious Kennewick Man. After carefully reading skull wards and studying race and science, origins of the first American, social evolution and cultural assimilation, and Indian identity and ancestry, I am led to believe that the Kennewick Man belongs to the Native Americans. Yes, the scientists can prove a lot and can answer some of the unanswered questions surrounding the Kennewick Man. Without scientific proof, history might change as we know it. If the scientists were given the opportunity to get the remains and it turned out to be the remains of the Native American ancestry, the remains would be turned over to them and they would get the opportunity to give them a proper burial. Is it worth it? The Native Americans have been through a lot. Racism, cultural assimilation, being treated like slaves from our government. Some things really don't change when it comes to our U.S. government. The Native Americans were the first here. This is what we were taught in school. Anthropologists such as John Blumenbach and Samuel George Morton had classifications of their own. Blumenbach was the first to give the classification to human races: Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and Negroid. He believed that humanity was the product of a single divine creation. He instilled in his generation that race could be linked to skull skies and, by extension, to numerous levels of human intelligence. His approach crippled many and started a new wave of scientific research on human skulls and opened the looting of Indian graves across America. Blumenbach, just like me, never wavered against the biblical view that the earth and humanity came from a single godlike creation. His theory is that after the flood, which is in the Bible, as a story some of us know as Noah in the Ark, the differences in appearance was due to the various environments the people encountered during that time, thus creating humans that were of non-Caucasian races. Flashing back to the beginning of the semester, we learned that history is different from the past. The past is everything collectively, and history is a story an individual chooses to tell by just pinpointing specific sections of events. Zinn 1980 and Schwickwart and Allen 2004 both examined the interaction between the U.S. government and American Indians during the 19th century. In Zen 1980, the author describes the cheating and cruelty that fell upon the Native Americans. In 1790, there were 3,900,000 Americans, and most of them lived at least 50 miles of the Atlantic Ocean. About 50 years later, 4,500,000 had crossed the Appalachian Mountains into the Mississippi River. In 1820, 120,000 Indians lived east of the Mississippi. By 1844, fewer than 30,000 were left. The statement that stuck out to me the most states most of them had been forced to migrate westward, but the word forced cannot convey what happened. Indians, in reference to this reading selection, were killed off, and the article states Indian removal was necessary for the opening of the vast American lands to agriculture. Zen, in my opinion, wanted to show that the removal of the Indian people to the east of the Mississippi was vital to the growth of the United States, not taking into consideration that the Indian people, the Native Americans, had to give up a lot and had to start over so that the growth could take place. Andrew Jackson, in my opinion, was one of the main persons as to why the Native Americans had to migrate to the West. It also goes on to say that the Indians were dealt more with patronization than by force. To patronize means to treat someone in a way that they feel you are superior over them, and that is exactly how the Native Americans felt, so they had no other choice but to finally give in and be removed. I, in my opinion, have a lot of sympathy for the Native Americans and not for the government. 70,000 Indians east of the Mississippi were forced westward, and Jackson's government was to blame. Swartworth and Allen from The Patriot's History of the United States is another selection that depicts the interaction between the U.S. government and American Indians during the 19th century. It was work nonstop for the wives, who had to cook meals, clean the house, and make sure children were taken care of. When the time came to migrate, there was a price to pay, and the Indians had to suffer that price. Upon first contact, Indians and non-Indians were often peaceful towards one another, and many important cross-cultural exchanges. The article then goes on to say, however, this initial peace was always followed by conflict over land, which led to a land treaty, and then more misunderstanding and anger, and eventually a war, which always ended in the Indian defeat. The Indians were always left to feel the repercussion of whatever took place. The government, on the other hand, are the ones we are to have no sympathy for, because they are the ones who cause these circle events to happen. Therefore, I think the position of the Native Americans in regards to they getting the remains of the Kennewick Man, because they have been through a lot, and it's about time that the government sees that and pays them for everything that they have lost.